Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast, sponsored by the IBCA. We are a global podcast that shares the passion for the coaching profession. You will hear the stories of coaches from all around the world. We are covering the profession in game, outside of the game, and anything in between. As always, thank you for listening. We look forward to sharing the coaches' stories with you.
Welcome back to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast. We have a tremendous guest today, Evan Massey, retired head coach, 1,000 wins, Hall of Fame, so much experience. We're excited to have you on, Coach, and learn from you. And how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Doing fine. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. So we start every episode with the opening tip, and I think it'll be cool for our listeners. Like I said, you've had such you had such a great career, and you're doing so much cool stuff with your blog right now. Kind of tell us about your journey and how you came to get where you are now and where you've been. And I think that'll be an awesome story for our listeners.
Okay, the problem is at my age when you start to tell the journey, it may be that I'm still talking in 2 hours, and you kind of trying to
It's okay.
get through the whole years with it stuff. I grew up in Savannah, Illinois, and my dad had been a basketball coach at Fulton, Illinois, and at Savannah, and he'd retired by the time I was born, and he was athletic director, and so I followed him around and watched all the things that he was doing. And that's obviously where I got hooked on basketball. And from Savannah, I went to Knox College, and I was fortunate to have a guy by the name of Harley Nosher was my basketball coach. And Harley, just a phenomenal individual. And I think part of my motivation then as a coach was I saw with him of what an impact he had on individuals and creating a culture. And I thought, man, it'd be great to be able to do that myself, of being able to create something like that. And I was fortunate right out of Knox. I got hired at Galesburg as a boys assistant coach and worked for Mike Owens and Barry Swanson, and exciting times in Galesburg then with full gym all the time. And the 76 team, we went to Elite Eight. And then there was a change in coaching, and I kind of stepped out for a year, and then they had an opening in a girls' job, and I went ahead and went into that. In fact, my first venture in coaching was at Knox my senior year. They would have been 74. They were just starting the women's program at Knox, and I was playing as a senior, and Coach Nosher was the athletic director, and he hired me on a hourly rate. I think it was back then, it was $2.25 an hour to coach the women's team, and a limited schedule they started out. So that was my first experience doing that. And then coached the girls at Galesburg. And after the first 9 years, we had a losing record. And so probably if there'd been as much interest in girls basketball then as there is today, I probably would have been fired sometime along that line. And so I was fortunate there wasn't the same level of interest. And for me, somebody that had a profound effect on my program and the development of things was Daryl Kipp at Maine West. And I was on the IBCA All-State Board, and it was just getting started then in the mid-'80s. And Daryl gave me a sheet and said, we've got these summer tournaments, you should bring your team up. And so we hadn't done anything in the summer in terms of playing games. And we went up there for a weekend, and I think we played 3 or 4 games and probably lost all of them by 30 points, realized that was a good experience. And we then, after that, we'd go up every summer to Maine West, 2 different weekends, and we'd probably, play anywhere 6 to 10 games a weekend and play against all the better suburban teams and kind of see, what was possible as far as basketball. We started our own summer league and things. And I think it, not a coincidence in that. So the first 9 years had a losing record, never won a regional. And then sometime in the late 80s started, and we won 18 regionals in a row, and then got into the 90s and 9 sectionals in a row, and things really, got going then. But attribute a lot of it to that experience of going up there. And then we set up our own league down here. And it's still going, and gives a chance for our kids, 7th grade through 12th grade, a chance to play. And that's kind of how got to where we are. And then last year I retired, and so now, this is an hour of time that looking forward to, because I don't get to talk a lot of basketball. So I'm happy to be on here.
So, so I have so many jokes there. One, I want to make a joke that I think $2.25 is probably more than Todd and I make during the season.
I was gonna say, I was gonna think of the same thing. It's about the same. I don't know if it's much different.
It could be, yeah. I mean, yeah, and I didn't. All it was practicing games. I didn't do any scouting. I didn't do anything.
But yeah, I am still someone that goes to the Maine West Summer Leagues every year, and just the history of it from Kip on to Kuzmanik now is just tremendous on all the teams that have ever played there. So I really do like that you brought that up, because it's a historic summer league.
Well, there's no doubt in my mind of, there'll be people, maybe it's a minor frustration on my part. There'll be people who have been in girls basketball coaching in Illinois for 10 years or 15 years, and they'll want to talk about, they'll see something and say, well, this is, the greatest coach, or this is the greatest player and stuff. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind of, there is nobody that had more impact on girls basketball in Illinois than Daryl Kipp. And yep. I think the things that he did, his summer league that he did, the things he did where, he was the first. Boys basketball wasn't doing it when they went to 3 tournaments and things, where he created that tournament that there were games that started in November and the tournament was still going in January, but increasing the number of games and getting the best teams to play each other and stuff. That he had such an impact in girls basketball, and the impact translated not to just better basketball programs in girls basketball in Illinois, but the number of players that probably were seen and got scholarships and were paid to go to college because of what he did. I know we did. We had Molly Watson, and she would have graduated in 97, and Steve Tucker for the Sun-Times always was there watching stuff. And he passed on to Doug Bruno that we had this little guard that he thought was pretty good, and that Bruno came and watched a couple of her games at Maine West, and the next thing she was 4 years at DePaul University, and at rural Galesburg, that wouldn't have happened without the Maine West tournament.
For sure. So we always find it interesting, those origin stories, and so we're gonna kind of dig deeper now into your story with the first part of the episode. So kind of let's take it back 50 years and talk about that first time you took over as a head coach. You're a younger teacher. You took over pretty young in your career as a head coach. Kind of what made you decide, like, this is the school, I want to start at, I want to be at, I want to build.
Well, I mean, I graduated in 1970, and so I was a basketball fan growing up in the 1960s, and I'm obviously biased, but I don't think there would probably be many places, if you were a basketball person, that you'd want to be at more than at Galesburg. That the John Thiel era in the 1960s in Galesburg, and the community support for boys basketball was fantastic. And part of, I think, when I went into the girls program, my hope was that maybe we could end up obviously the community liked basketball, but maybe could create the same excitement and get the same following. And, fortunately, that did happen.
So we do our homework a little bit. You mentioned your dad, Hall of Fame coach. You were from Savannah. Your brother was a head coach, right? I believe in Clinton.
Yeah.
When you first started it, and along the way, how did you take those things that you saw and learned and kind of apply them, but maybe put them into your own way? You know what I mean? Because that's a lot, that's a big part of it, of learning from other people, but taking it and putting it into what you are. What were some of those things you learned along the way?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, my father had retired as a coach before I was born. And then he was AD, but he passed away when I was 12. So with my dad, I just, there's like snippets of things I remember, and all of a sudden situations you'd take with you. And, the obvious was I can remember him saying the thing about players are made in the summer. That's, I think, been part of a mantra with my players of understanding that if you want to be good, you got to put the work in the summer, and you got to do those kinds of things with it. But I think also little things where I can remember after a ball game where walking with him, and we went down and talked to the opposing coach and they had won, and listening to those conversations. And I think it made me aware of how, as a coach, if you want to be successful, you need to develop some of those relationships. If you view all the coaches as your opponents and as an enemy, I think you're going to lose out in terms of the experience that you get as a coach, but also your ability as a coach if you're isolated like that. So I think those are things that learned from them. And my brother was started out at one point, he was a basketball coach, boys basketball, men's basketball at Mount St. Clair. It was a 2-year school in Clinton. And his interest, he got out of it and into volleyball. And I think sometimes volleyball coaches compared to basketball coaches are more into the areas of, motivation and culture than basketball coaches. We're always looking for that next out of bounds play. And with them, and the value is in terms of with my brother that has just been tremendous is to have somebody where he'll call when he's got a problem with a parent or something, and I'll call him, and you have those conversations back and forth. So it's almost like it doubles your experience, because even though it's not my problem, you hear his problem, and you work through that. And the irony is now my son, he started out as a manager at Drake University, and then was a GA at Louisiana Tech, and then was video coordinator at Longwood out east. And now he's on the Tulsa University men's basketball program. And I'm not sure what the date was. At some point, he passed me up as far as basketball knowledge. And so now it's just, it's fun to watch him working, but it's also fun to pick his brain about things.
So it's interesting because you are the second straight guest. We just had Coach Brewington from Genoa Kingston on, and he kind of, in his 30-second timeout, a little bit talked about, learning from others and, not viewing. He said he kind of talked about in the young years in his career, he viewed the other coaches as the enemy. So, maybe for somebody with your experience, what did you find were the best ways to learn from someone else, or whether it be a conference rival or somebody you saw something they were doing and you're like, hey, I would like to use this in my program, or whatever it may be. What were some of the ways that you kind of felt that you helped yourself grow through other coaches?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And definitely I'm going to sound like, the old school coach of kind of like what's wrong with young coaches today. And I don't mean that necessarily, but I think that's a hole in basketball right now where you look, used to be we did rules interpretation meetings, and everybody went there, and you sat with some people that you coached against, and somebody say, let's go get a burger and a beer, and you'd go out 4 or 5 people and you'd sit and talk, and you'd develop a relationship where you're not necessarily sharing X's and O's, but a relationship. The same thing with seating meetings. You went face to face and stuff, and now you don't have that opportunity. I can remember afterwards of, seating meetings, you'd go and you'd sit down, and you might sit for, 2 or 3 hours shooting the breeze about different things, and you develop that. And then the same thing, the state tournament, where I think, when they went from 2 classes to 4 classes, it was 2 classes, it was a coaches convention in girls basketball that you could pretty much find and talk to any coach that you wanted to. Now you go there and it's, more like, where's Waldo? You try to, looking around to see, is there any coach there to talk to? So you lose those relationships. But I think you start out, just that in terms of social, but then, showing a willingness to exchange information. And back at one time, it was the willingness. Jay Hatch was at Alleman, and the two of us it's maybe 50 minutes apart from where we lived. And we'd have a spot in Alwood where we'd meet and we'd exchange the old VHS tapes and, talk for a little bit. You do those kind of things. But I've been fortunate of just a lot of relationships. The first, I think, for coaches is developing a relationship with the coach of the other gender basketball. So for me, I've had a lot of great boys basketball coaches, Mike Miller that came through here, Mike Reynolds recently with it. And, you got a resource right there. You can sit down in their office and you talk and you do that. But same thing of just, relationships with people like Tom Siegel is somebody that coached here. And I've never found any coach that isn't willing, even if they're people that you'd play against, Mike Cooper at Ottawa, and I mentioned Jay Hatch, of people like that. I haven't found any coaches who aren't willing to share. I can remember we were going to play in a super sectional and the team zoned the out of bounds plays. And I thought our zone out of bounds plays were horrible. And I called up Mike Cooper at Ottawa, and I just knew he, was a good X and O person. And it wasn't our first conversation. If it was our first conversation, he probably would have said, well, I really don't have anything. But we'd had other conversations. And so he gave me a couple ideas as far as out of bounds plays. And, that was probably 25 years ago. And our best out of bounds play for the next 25 years was something that he shared over the phone that particular time. But I think that's important to do those things. And I really think that's where with the IBCA, with the state coaches convention, that I think it's a horrible mistake for young coaches or old coaches not to attend that clinic, just from the standpoint of developing networking, of you're in a non-adversarial situation and you can talk and develop a relationship, and it's only going to help you. But to me, it's sad the number of young coaches that don't go. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Bob Anderson that at Williamsfield. And I coached 50 years. I think he coached 150 years. That was always involved. But I never went to any clinic where you didn't see Bob Anderson. And this was when he had, at the end of his career, you would see him front row at every single clinic of, whether you went to a clinic in Indiana or Chicago. He must have just gone to clinics all the time. But not only did he have a wealth of knowledge, but he had a wealth of relationships too.
So an interesting question for you, I think, particularly is, you've obviously from Title IX on seen an abundance of changes in girls basketball, but what do you see, over the next 10 years? If you want to make it 5, that's fine, a little more recent, but, what are some changes you see in the game going forward into the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, I've never been great predicting of when they put the 3-point line in. I remember I was quoted in the paper of saying, well, it's not going to affect girls basketball. It's just going to be the prayer at the end of the game. When it's answered, it's going to get an extra point. Well, obviously, I didn't have insight into that. But, I think, probably the best predictors of what happens to the game of basketball is you just look at the higher levels of, whether it's NBA or WNBA, and then you look at the college game, and things that are going on there are things that have a influence of how the game is played. And to me, the most significant change in the last 20 years in basketball is going to a lot more of the dribble drive things. That it's more, basketball is more off the dribble versus cutting and off the pass kind of thing. And that's a transition that's happened. I don't know, I think you look, I don't know that it'll happen the next 5 years, but, you kind of wonder what's going to happen with the transfers in high school sports, where it seems like my perspective is it's harder and harder to compete If, like for us, we're in a more rural area, there isn't, a lot where, somebody's attracted to move into Galesburg with things. You guys more in the suburban area are aware of the, there's certain programs that are transfer programs, and that, I don't know there's a solution to it, but it's something that sure changed, the nature of it. I think, and this isn't a positive change over the next 5 or 10 years, but the direction you see the combination AAU and parents roles, I don't think we're headed for a positive situation in those cases. Is I've gone to, not just Galesburg games, but have gone to some college games and gone to different high school games. And then what I would label as the number of crazy dads is just unbelievable. And, it used to be, I think, 20 or 25 years ago, in my definition of that crazy dad who was going to coach all the time, that I can remember a dad telling me how he knew other people would be upset if he knew he was coaching his kid. And so he'd, like baseball, develop signals so that, people weren't hearing him, but his kid would look up to see what was going on. And, there was kind of a norm that yelling at and coaching your kid during a high school game wasn't something that you should be doing. And today that doesn't exist at all. And what I've noticed is I've been in the last 3 weeks, I've been to 3 games where not only do the dads yell, but they sit right at half court in the first row, and they deal with those things. And so it's not something in terms of the direction of basketball. I don't have the solution, but it doesn't seem like basketball's headed necessarily in a positive situation. And the other would be the concern going forward is what's going to happen with referees. Of that, it's not good as far as getting referees back in. And I don't know if the solution is that we have to go back to 2 refs. And if we probably go back to 2 refs because we don't have enough to do 3, we'll probably lose more refs because they're not going to do it if they're only going to be 2 refs out there and stuff. But I don't know how the nuts and bolts of it would work, but I would like to see something where the IHSA did something where they asked each school to pay in a certain amount based on their enrollment, and just get a pool of money that we throw at things, where maybe now this pool of money where a ref going in to start with will pay for all of their startup costs for if they end up work 10 games in a year. Take this pool of money, and somebody, if they're willing to be a mentor for a young ref, that will, throw some money at them. I don't know if that would solve it, but I think just advertising to say we need refs, it doesn't seem like it's working.
No doubt. To be honest, that's a topic that's came up in a lot of, I don't know, probably what the last 4 or 5 episodes, John, of referees, and John and I kind of have conversations about it all the time. It's even trickling up to the D3 college where I'm at now. We have younger refs, but they work hard, but they just don't have the experience, so that's where all the younger refs are going, because it's a little bit more money and things like that. It's an interesting dynamic we have going on right now.
Yeah, and it's when I first started, the method that they used was that they'd have a runner go with them. So it was the varsity game was 2 veterans working. The sophomore game would be a young guy, and the two veterans would be there for that sophomore game. But the one veteran would work the first half with the rookie, and then the second half the other one would. And so as they're working with them in a timeout, they're talking to that young ref, and then he's sitting watching them during the next game and going out afterwards and doing it. And something like that, maybe something like that would work. Or even, if we started saying, okay, we're going to have a 3-man crew, but what we need to do is everybody understand one of the 3 is going to be a young guy that's being trained, and, accept that, it may not be the best quality of officiating, but helping them learn.
So I wanted to give you a chance to plug your blog a little bit for our listeners. If you haven't checked it out, you need to check it out because it's awesome. It's a mix of everything. It's some history. It's some current stuff. It's it's really cool. So first, maybe just give us, our listeners where they can find it, and obviously we'll promote it on our social media and things like that. And then, when you were thinking about it, or what made you kind of want to start it and share all the information you have and all the great ideas that are on there.
Well, thank you first for the plug. It's for me now. It's fun to do. It's simply if they look up Massey basketball blog, they can end up get to it. And then on Facebook, I have a Facebook page, Massey Basketball, and usually what I do is each time I put something up, I put a link to that and deal with it. And if anybody's interested, actually, I've got. I'm not very creative with names. I've got a Massey basketball clinic that's a private group on Facebook too. So if somebody wanted to email me, that I could, get them on that. My email is emass70@yahoo.com. So those kind of things. But with the blog, it's interesting. Got it started in somewhere around like 2009 or something. I decided Knox is in the same conference as Grinnell, and people that know Grinnell is the system of the run and trap and press all over constantly and shoot a lot of threes. They were, threes and layups only before anyone else. And I decided for several reasons to go to that. And at that time, and I knew it wasn't something that was normal. And so my fear was, I got to get the word out. And so I used the blog originally as a propaganda tool to try and moms loved it because the kids were having fun, and a lot of kids, but dads hated it because they thought, that they weren't learning real basketball and stuff. But that's how I used it to start with. And then when off and on, then after we quit the system, or like around 2013, so I did it maybe 4 or 5 years, that kind of faded off as far as doing it. But most of what I did was promoting my own program of where we'd like interview seniors before senior night and things like that. And I thought for us that was effective, and I liked doing that. So then last spring I retired, and I had no intent to, it wasn't something I planned out and said, well, I'm retired, I'm going to really become a full-time blogger. And it's just one thing led to another. And part of my motivation was, it seemed to me like in our area, the local newspapers died. That for our athletes, there's no local coverage at all with it. It's bought over by corporations and things. So, my thought was of maybe, using this as something to promote basketball. And then what's happened is it's just whatever my interests are. And so have, one of the projects that I've been working on is, I call it Streak Scrapbook, where it started back from 1950 and just alternating every girls and boys team that went to state, the definition being Sweet 16. And so my wife laughs because she doesn't think I knew where the library was. And now I'll go down and spend a day in the library going through old newspaper articles and reading, it's just fascinating stuff from the 50s and 60s about those things. So I've had those, and then it's blossomed out. One of my favorite things is I do every 2 weeks, I pose a question. It's old school coaches. And I've got some Hall of Fame football coaches, Mike Tracy that was Alleman, and Greg King that was at Sterling, and then my brother, and then Tom Siegel at Rock Island, Bob Anderson, Greg Bennett, and I'm missing some, but it's interesting getting their perspective on a variety of topics that way. And so it's been a lot of fun because it's kind of like the local reporter, Jay Redfern. I always laughed with him. I've said, I'm always good at doing other people's job a lot better than I am doing my own, and would say, you should do an article on this. You should do an article on that. Well, now it's kind of like that's an opportunity for me to be able to do that. And so have really enjoyed it. And there's some things that really serious, like did a series of, I think it were 5 posts on um, females coaching females, and interviewed 9 different young uh, women basketball coaches and their perspective on things. And it's the kind of thing that I would hope that maybe some athletic directors would read and understand, kind of things from a female's perspective. So it's been fun.
Yeah, it's I was looking through it a little bit, and there's so much stuff I had to like try to prioritize and pick which one I was trying to do, you know.
Uh,
Um, so I wanted to talk to you. We're going to go halftime adjustments, kind of halfway point before we switch to kind of the main topic. I wanted to talk to you, and this may be a little personal. I was just talking to John about our game where we kind of came out not as well as we wanted to yesterday. We were playing Concordia, Wisconsin, but translating like your prep in practice, right? You're working on a team. Maybe you play Saturday or Friday, and you've had 2 days, and this team's going to do this, and this team's going to do this, and you do all the work. And the kids, were like, yeah, I know it. And translating that to, okay, now and putting it in action in the game. And maybe even like coming out of halftime adjustments. How did you help your players, execute and prepare for taking it from practice or adjustments you made at halftime to now we got to put this into a game?
well, I wish I'd be, in answering the question, I'd be answering by saying, here's what I hoped was going to happen, because
Oh, for
we're
sure.
all of us the same situation you're describing, with those of the puzzle of you think you've had great prep, you've watched the other team's film, and you really have a handle on what you want to stop, and you had great practices, you think, and you go, and then your team's out flat. And it's like, what happened with it. I just, and I'm not saying this is your case, but for me, I always look back and would think, I always thought like the first 4 minutes of the game showed who practiced the hardest. And I think one of my faults as a coach was that sometimes big game, and I've done lots of homework and lots of prep, I talked too much in practice, and we didn't have the practice as intense as we needed. That not making practice as competitive. I don't know if this talks to what you're saying, but something my son encouraged me to do, that he said every college he's been at, they've done, is I used to end up before the game of, we'd go in, I don't know, maybe it was at the end of the third quarter of the prelim game. And so we've got about 10 or 15 minutes, and I would have the chalkboard would be full. Well, that's old school chalkboard, dry erase full. And we go through, here's the 7 sets that they run and the out of bounds plays. And here's what we want to do. And would talk to him for 15 minutes. And my son's point of view was, you're doing that for yourself. You're not doing that for them. Because think about it, before a game, they don't want to have their head filled up and doing those things. And so what we did my last few years, which I really thought made us play a lot more loose and a lot more free at the beginning of games, is we would end up, whether maybe it was after school, we would go in and would go through the same thing, that 10 or 15-minute talk then, and get on the bus to go to an away game, or they'd go home and get something to eat. But then once we got to the game time, now what would go in, and it would be just like take 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, and would just have 3 keys written up there, not a lot of detail or anything. And so as a result, I wasn't trying to make them think. It was just more of, getting ready. And I felt like our kids were a lot more relaxed and more into it, because I think as I look back, when I was going through all those X's and O's for 10 minutes before a game, I was stressed, thinking about that game. And it's like it had to be kids reading my body language. The more I talked, the more nervous I had to be getting and stuff. Where now it just the flow. And I think that was something that was a real positive for us.
Yeah. So like when you came to like individual players, right? And like I'm guarding you today. That's my matchup. What kind of information did you give your players? Was it just like, okay, what's their biggest strength and try to take that away, or you know what I mean? So they're not because you obviously have to know who you're guarding. So you can't just sometimes go out there and not be prepared, and then you're like, oh, what happened? But what kind of information did you give your players of, hey, this is your matchup. This is kind of what I want you to do or try to do in that given game?
Well, I don't know if it was good or bad, but it's what I did. Is when we started to have good teams and we were playing for a sectional championship or going to state, of realized, okay, then it's like, okay, now we're serious, and I'm putting together a written scouting report. And it's kind of realized, well, why do you wait until that point that you give them this detailed scouting report? They haven't learned to use it, that need to do it earlier. And so I vowed then I'm going to end up put together, if we're playing a team that is 5-20, I'm going to put together the same kind of scouting report I would for that good team. And it's simply so when we get to that good team, it's not anything new. This is how we do things, and they're prepared. But on it, in terms of individuals, of looking at what am I going to put, we try to now with Huddle, you can, get 10 films on people and get their stats. So the big things there, we would have their scoring average, their rebound average. We'd try to have their field goal and 3-point percentage on there. And so if it's they're guarding somebody, I wanted them to know of, are they more a driver or shooter? If they're a driver, what do they want to do? Are they going to go baseline? Do they want to go in the middle? Are they right or left-handed? And that sounds like a lot, but just of saying more shooter or driver, are they right or left-handed? And then the big thing now is, can a person shoot a three or not? And so kind of keeping it simple in terms of those things. I've seen, I don't know, remember who it was. I heard somebody speak at a clinic where what they did, and it was in men's basketball, that in their scouting report, they labeled people, they took 5 pro players and they labeled, this is a Klay Thompson, great shooter, not going to look to drive. This is so and so. And their claim, and it seems valid to me, was that it was a great way for young guys to look at and identify, what the player was like. And so helping them with the guarding.
My favorite on those is when you get to like, this is a LeBron, and then you're like, uh-oh, got nothing.
Well,
got nothing for.
Yeah, I mean, they did have something like that where I don't know if it was LeBron or it was a step of just saying, because it was like what they were doing is they were trying to say, this is a player that's just going to drive. This is a player that's
for sure. No, I've seen
that. And
yeah.
So then they get to a step. Okay, good luck. This is a person who wants to drive. This is a person who's going to shoot in terms of what's going on there. I think, what you said of carrying information out from the timeout. I think there are times where I know I had to be horrible in a timeout because I'm giving, trying to give 20 bits of information, and I don't think they remember anything. And of those 20 bits, there probably are just 2 or 3 things that I should have been saying to them in terms of doing that. I think that's significant. And even, with the Huddle, with things, I know late in my career, I did I know a lot of people are positionless, but they still kind of, my 1 sits here and then it's 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm not screwing around trying to figure out who I've subbed in and who's on the floor with things. I think, The other is with timeouts is people just need to make sure that they on their posy board. I've seen coaches that'll put drawings together, and I have no idea, looking at their drawing, what it is that they're talking about. Is that we need to really make an effort to make sure those are clean.
I do think that's always interesting too about the drawing things up, and that's great. You taught it, but did they actually listen and learn and understand what you were saying? I think that's always interesting in a timeout as well. So as we get into the second half of the episode, we kind of want to talk about maybe your career as a whole, but we'll hit on some X's and O's here, but more maybe things that, younger coaches can learn from you about just a variety of topics. And the first one is kind of balancing that family and coaching and teaching lifestyle. I think, we all at times kind of struggle with that as you're trying to prepare for, big games or 3 games this week, or I got a plan for the summer or whatever it may be, and also balancing that family time. So maybe what were some things you did to try to, intentionally also make sure that your family was around and involved, etc.?
I would say, this is probably a question. If you ask my wife, you'd get a different answer than you would from me. That I'm not sure that I necessarily did the best job in terms of balancing those the family and basketball, that I think during the season became, so basketball focused. And as my wife would say, there never seemed to be an off season. It just basketball went 12 months a year. And so, yeah, I mean, I look back and I'm confident I could have done that better with it. I don't know if it's balancing it, but I do think one of the things as a coach that there's a value with it is at a certain age, I don't know, for us, it was when my son got to be 4 years old, or when it was, where they can start hanging around and tagging along. And I think that becomes a positive that, yes, as a coach, you're having to go away from your family a lot, but having the ability to take your son or your daughter to practices or to games. There aren't a lot of jobs that you could have where you can, on a regular basis, take your kid to work with you. And so I would encourage people to do that, an opportunity with it. I look back, some great memories have with my son, where when we go away to a team camp, when we'd go up to Maine West, and all of those kind of things were positive in terms of doing it. I think probably what was fortunate for me is I'm not a handyman. So for my wife, she didn't have very high, the bar was pretty low as far as her expectations of me around the house, I think, with a negative that way. So I think the obvious is that, I should have made more effort, and I would encourage coaches to do that.
So you mentioned X's and O's, or you changed the system for a little bit, right? So like kind of over the years, you have your ideas, this is what we want to do, but when did you kind of know, or what things made you think about, hey, maybe we need to tweak something, or we need to do something different? Obviously, players have a big role in that, but like saying whatever you were doing before, then going to the system, like what kind of stimulated that idea and said, hey, we should try this, or we got to do something a little bit different here with what we're doing to try to be more successful, or try to fit the girls we have better.
Well, I think with X's and O's, that a belief in Galesburg when I came in, and it went back to the 60s and the Thiel era, was that belief was a head coach was in charge of the entire program. So you, as a head coach, you were involved in all interviews with junior high, fresh soft coaches, all of those things. And whether that made it that you were hiring better people or the right people, it did send a message to the coach that's hired that I'm responsible to this person. And so you could get them to do things. And for us, as it evolved, and probably by the time it coached 10 or 15 years, had a core of 6 man-to-man sets. I wouldn't call them, there weren't, continuity or thing, just kind of quick hitters, set plays. We had about 6 man-to-man, and we had 4 zone actions. And those remained consistent for me over the next 30 years. But the difference was they were never completely the same, that they were very, very basic, very vanilla. But what we would do is, okay, for example, we had one of them was setting a middle ball screen for a guard. Well, if it turns out that post was a big kid, we'd have options. Well, then what we'll do this year is we're going to do this with them. And then the next time we've got a post that's a 3-point shooter, okay, they're going to set that middle ball screen. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have them go off of a fade that we can skip the ball to. So my point is that I think what was great was the kids were learning these simple plays in 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade. And by the time they got to us, those were natural, they were simple. And all of them had a purpose. The purpose was to teach, we're making sure we've got something in where the coach at the lower level is going to have to teach a screener action. They're going to have to teach a flex action. They're having to teach a middle ball screen. They're going to have to teach a back door, a side ball screen. So they're doing those things, but then it's not, I wasn't regimented to say, this is what we're going to run. That sometimes we'd get to the varsity level and there would be some of those that we wouldn't run at all, but the others over time, you'd watch a game on TV, an opponent would give you trouble, and you'd say, okay, how can we incorporate that into these things? And that's what we do, and that's how it evolved. But I can, as far as changing things, I can remember as a young coach of having a pad of paper, watching the NCAA tournament, and here I'm coaching, a high school girls basketball team that's 18, and I'm watching some team in the Final Four. Like, really, these plays are going to be what I need? But you do that, and whether you use them or not, you're learning about the game, and you do it. But with Grinnell, for us of going to it, it's kind of, I was always intrigued because in Galesburg, everybody would come to watch when they'd play. And part of it was, see if it would work. And we thought we had the right personnel for it.
Sorry, tech issue there. So we wanted to talk to you a little bit also just about, you kind of talked about the parent aspect, but over 40 plus years of coaching, working with different admin and different parents and different community members and families, kind of how did you manage all that? Because I do think, at least, and we've talked to an abundance of coaches that talk about that first, second, third year, and they kind of realized as a head coach, there's a whole lot more that goes into it that has nothing to do with basketball. So kind of how did you manage all those personalities of, now you have this AD or this principal or this parent or this community member, how did you manage all of those personalities?
I think I was lucky to start with. When I was a young coach, a different era, and had administrators that were very, very supportive. I can remember the first AAD I worked for had been retired for 7 or 8 years. And I was sitting with him at a basketball game, and a former parent came in, and the AD turned to me and he goes, "Man, they hated your guts." And I go, "What?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he relayed how that person had called him a couple of times, had come into the office and talking about should get fired. And I said to him, "You never told me about that." And he goes, "You were young." He goes, "You would have melted if you'd heard that." And he goes, "I just ended up handling it and went on." And I don't know that that's the right way to do things, but I think I was sheltered in that way, and so that it was a little bit easier to do that. The problem today is I got, letter, all of us as coaches have gotten, the letter of where a parent sends that at the end of the season, sends a 10-page letter that's designed to help me with personal growth. And you go through that. At least then they had to write it. They had to find an envelope. They had to find a stamp. They had to look up your address. And maybe by the time they got done, they said, this is stupid, and they threw it away. Today, it's like, man, boom, boom, boom. They've got an email sent to you before they even pause. I got, in the last 5 years, had gotten an email from a father who was upset. A game that we won to win the conference. We went in, and the guy ends up sending an email, and it had to have been off of his phone like 30 minutes after the game, and it's just irate about his daughter's playing time. And those are the tough ones as far as dealing with. And everybody says always do the preseason meetings, and the problem with the preseason meetings is sometimes the people that need to be there, that they just send the mom and the dad doesn't go and do those kind of things. But I think I don't think there's an easy solution to dealing with parent conflicts and those kind of things. If you go back and you realize and you try to make them understand, we want the same thing. You want your daughter to be successful. I want your daughter to be successful. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, and hope that you can convey that to them. But I think with athletic directors, and too many coaches don't realize that the athletic director should be your teammate. That doesn't mean the athletic director, just like you tell a player that their role is going to be different than what they want, the AD sometimes has to tell you as a coach that your role is going to be a little different than you want. But you still have to work with them and be supportive of the athletic director. And I've found that if I showed loyalty to my athletic director and I communicated to my athletic director, in the long run, then they would be loyal to me and they would communicate also. But I think that's a big thing, is of communicate and help your AD so he's not blindsided by anything.
I personally like the phrasing of a letter to help me with my personal growth. I thought that was said so well.
Do you think that would be the way to respond to them? Thank you for the personal growth seminar.
That was good. So as we get into our last two segments, the first one we call 30-second timeout. It's your opportunity to kind of discuss whatever you'd like, something that's important to you, your family, your program, something you want our listeners to know. You could turn the tables and ask Todd and I a question. This segment's kind of just very open. And as we say to all of our guests, we promise there is no referee telling you that there is a first horn, second horn in your 30-second timeout. It is a very loose 30 seconds. The floor is yours.
I would just like to reemphasize kind of what we've talked about, or I talked about earlier with coaches. I think the number one thing I would recommend to coaches is to work on networking. That just develop, is the number of coaches that you can call, you can text, and you can do that. Develop relationships with the other coaches, because kind of what you talked about in the last segment, of where you said, how do you handle those things, is it helps to have other coaches that you're going to share those with. I'm betting with the two of you, of how did you get started in this? It has to be, part of somehow you guys networked.
Yep. Yes, absolutely. I'm going to be honest with you, Coach. This whole show is networking. We talk to coaches all around the world, from Guam to Europe to Africa to everywhere in the United States. So this entire thing has become networking for Todd and I. And I'm not going to put it all out there, but one of the guests that we had on, now Todd works alongside, so I think it's, I think that's, this profession is, I lean on coaches all the time. I'm going to be very transparent. I text people all the time. Hey, we're not doing this well. Hey, what do you know about this situation? Hey, what can you give me as advice on this situation? Because I do think that's valuable.
Well, I think, like Todd's question earlier, where I don't know, I don't want to bring up a sore subject, but I'm assuming they must have lost yesterday.
Yeah, we sure did. We sure did.
But the question you brought up, where you said, when they come out flat or they don't respond to the kind of things, I'm betting, just because of your interest level in basketball, is at a different level than just the average person. You wouldn't be doing this if you were just at an average level. I'm betting that I'm either not the first person that you asked that of, but I'm certainly not the last one. I'm betting that you've got other coaches that you're going to ask about that. And as you do that, it makes you a more confident coach in realizing that you're not the first coach that's dealt with that problem. That I've talked to 3 buddies that they've gone through the same thing. And, it sounds stupid, but so-and-so, I talked to them and here's something that they do. And you know what? I think it'll help. And I think it's just, to me, it's amazing how many young coaches don't have anything like that. And it's like they don't seem to want anything like that. And you need that in coaching.
There's no doubt.
There's just trying to figure it out and get ideas, right? I look at it as like your way's not always the right way. There's always something better to try to figure out, or it might work for your kids that year. So, all right, let's go to quick hitters. Just kind of rapid fire, random questions, having some fun here to end the episode. Obviously you have your blog and you're giving so much back to the game, but maybe what ways specifically do you want to give back to the game with your blog, or your being on this podcast or having conversations with other coaches?
Well, I'd say all of it. Right now the blog is something I spend a lot of time on, and I love it and enjoy it, and I hope it's meaningful. It really, I appreciate it when I get feedback from other coaches that they do. And like you said, I like to feel like I'm still part of the network, that I've got 2 or 3 coaches that not in Galesburg who I'm friends with and are still coaching, and they'll text me some questions like your question. And it's not like I've got the answers, but it's neat to be still part of the thing. And so having somebody say, how did you press this, or how did you do that, or could you look at my game film? So it's fun to be part of that still.
So this is a Todd and I question. We ask this all the time. Maybe what's a good secret place to enjoy some good food in Galesburg?
Galesburg has great food. We've our population's down, factory's down, but my son just came back from Tulsa at Christmas time, and he commented to me, he goes, "Man, you guys got every restaurant in the world here, it seems like." And our local restaurants are great. A downtown area where you could go for lunch. It's like the oldest restaurant in Galesburg, Coney Island, and you get your Coney dog there. And then you could go next street to Cherry Street Brewing Company, and they have great craft beer there, good food and stuff. That any of those would be great places.
So you mentioned, hearing stories of your dad's coaching career. Maybe a good story, one of your favorites, or something that you remember from hearing those stories and hearing, about his experiences.
Well, maybe one of the neat stories is just last fall, Fulton High School. He was first basketball coach at Fulton, and they had the distinction in 1936. They made it to the Elite Eight, and before the 2-class system, they were the only small school in Northwest Illinois that ever went to state during that until after 1972. And so he had great success there, but he had left Fulton, and so Fulton started up a athletic Hall of Fame about 3 or 4 years ago, and so last fall they invited my brother and I back there, that they inducted my father there. And so you have to look, I'd have to do the math, but the last time he coached at Fulton would have been like 85 years ago. And we sat at a table, and they first off then, that the guy who sat down there was somebody who was being inducted that had played in the 1970s. And when you introduce yourselves to the people at your table, he said, "So your dad's the one that started all this, isn't he?" And so we're blown away that here a guy who had played, would have been 35 years after my dad had coached there, that he, had that kind of impact, and that they brought out as part of my dad's induction the Massey Award that they give to it's to kind of I don't know their description of the best program player for the basketball team, the guy who, is most invested in being a player, being a teammate, being coached and stuff. So that was pretty impressive to think that, he's all these years later that he's not forgotten.
That is very cool. I
Awesome.
like that kind of stuff where we honor the history.
Mm-hmm.
So let's, this is another Todd and Jon question. In your 40 plus years as coaching, and we know, you've obviously driven around everywhere. What's maybe a crazy travel story on a bus you remember?
Is it supposed to be a good story or a bad story?
No, either one.
Gosh, we could have done a whole segment on that kind of thing. Good story is we used to take a train. Galesburg's a train town. Took a train to Chicago and then laid over in Chicago for 4 or 5 hours, and then took the train up to University of Michigan to a team camp. And so that was a positive experience. Another positive was we started in the late 80s and we'd play Maria and Maine South, New Trier, and go up there. And then usually what we'd do is play them in an afternoon and then go to a Bulls game at night. Is positive with it. And so those were great experiences. Probably the bad experience would be we once took a charter bus to North Carolina in the summer for a camp. And on the way back, the bus broke down in Knoxville, Tennessee. And the driver then took us into this it was like a Walmart and something else parking lot. And he said, I'm just going to stop here. We'll call and they'll send someone from a local bus company. And so this was like at 7 at night. Well, the bus came then at 7 a.m. the next day.
Whoa.
And so we were in a Walmart parking lot overnight with all the kids. They're ready to get home and they're stuck there. And in the middle, at about, I don't know when they take their break at Walmart in the evening, but they took a break at like 2 a.m. and the park's lit. And here come all these young guys, these workers coming out, and they're playing a softball game in the parking lot. And so some of our kids got picked on teams, and from about 2 a.m. to 3 a.m., they're playing softball in a Walmart parking lot. So that was funny.
The best away gym you coached in, or one of your favorites?
I just absolutely hate, complimenting other conference schools. So it's tough doing that. But I think, without a doubt, Wharton Fieldhouse at Moline is just unbelievable for a high school gym.
Yes.
And for us, years ago, right when they were in the middle of winning state titles, we went down to Carthage on a Saturday and played. And it was like Hoosiers revisited. They had the stage full. There were fans all over and stuff. And it was great atmosphere. But I think like right now, if you wanted to look and see what's possible in a high school venue, the place to go is Sterling High School. Mm-hmm. They have a field house and it's been recently all modernized, beautiful floor, beautiful seating. They have electronic scoreboard that is whoever operates, they know exactly all the things to do. And colleges could go and would be served to see what they can put up on there. And then what's just spectacular is in their lobby area, they have the best Hall of Fame area there is. You can punch up any of the people and they've got displays on them. You can go to another section and they've got video of their 1977 girls basketball team. You can watch highlights of the championship game in the spot. If a kid won the 300 hurdles, you can click and, see his entire race. And then they've got another area that's just a display of all the team and state championships and stuff. So I think somebody that's an administrator that's looking at trying to see what can be done with a high school venue they should go to Sterling. They would just be blown out of the water of what they've got.
All right, so last one. What's maybe a topic or two you're considering? You don't have to give too much away, but maybe something you're considering for your blog coming up.
Well, it's not intending to be secret with them. I've got one that I'm working on right now where I've gotten, I think it's 8 or 9 coaches in Illinois and Iowa that won state titles, and just asked them a series of questions about what it was like and also how did it impact them going forward, and things of Tom Siegel, Sean Taylor at Moline that have won at 2 different schools, Bob Becker at Morton. And so I have them. And then a name you guys would know, Scott Shaver, played basketball here in the 70s, had very good career, but he is coaching in Arizona, and he's coaching at one of those, I don't know how you describe them. I'm still working on to figure out the story, but like one of those basketball schools. And so like last night, their school is ranked number 10 in the nation, and their players are from all over the world, and they were playing the number 2 team. And so just curious, you see all those, Oak Hill Academy and all those different places. Well, he's an assistant coach at this place. And so what it's like, how do they get their players, all those kind of things. So that's kind of of where the blog is I'll be thinking of something that the blog gives me an excuse to ask some people questions that I just want to ask. It's opportunity. And somewhere along there, what I'll have to do is do a blog on the 2 of you and ask you how you got started in it. And then I'm curious to find out things like what was the best travel story you heard from any of your people, and go through that and see.
Well, we will definitely partner with you on that. But thank you again, Coach Massey, for joining us today. This was an excellent episode with phenomenal stories. I know our guests will love it. So thank you for your time again today.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast in partnership with the IBCA. Please be sure to rate us on whatever platform you are listening and give us a 5-star rating. For more show content and updates, please follow us on Twitter at After the Timeout. As always, thank you for listening. Tune in next time for more content on the court, off the court, and anything in between.